Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to dive into this with you today. Go ahead and think of me as your passionate history professor for the next few minutes, because we are unpacking a story that is equal parts mathematical genius and fiery political drama. We hear terms like inflation rates and consumer price indexes thrown around on the news every single day, almost like they're just natural laws of the universe. But they aren't. They were actually born out of bitter conflicts over wealth distribution, massive global currency shifts, and literal wars. So today, we're going to trace the incredible evolution of economic measurement to understand exactly how the metrics that dictate our modern world actually came to be.
Here is our agenda for today. First, gold and early political conflict. Second, the first big data. Third, perfecting the index math. Fourth, navigating wars and wages. Fifth, modern producer price indices. And finally, why retail prices stay high. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Gold and early political conflict. We are traveling way back in time to the 17th century, driven by the massive influx of New World gold. Now, early attempts at tracking prices weren't just abstract, boring academic exercises. They were urgent solutions to very real human problems. Back in 1675, a Welshman named Rhys Vaughan was trying to figure out why a flood of Spanish gold was causing prices to spike in England, and he did it by comparing wage statutes over time. Then, in 1707, William Fleetwood created what's probably the very first true price index, and his reason was entirely relatable. An Oxford student was about to lose his fellowship due to a centuries-old income limit. So Fleetwood tracked 260 years of prices just to prove the actual value of money had changed. Fast forward a bit to the 1860s, and we have William Stanley Jevons tracking the economic fallout of the 1850s gold rush. Jevons figured out that prices had spiked by a staggering 30% between 1848 and 1860. By taking relative prices and using a geometric average, which is basically a clever math trick to avoid distortions from one single item getting super expensive, he linked this 30% rise directly to those mid-century gold discoveries. This was a massive game changer. It took the folks calculating these numbers from being simple statisticians and turned them into true economists analyzing global cause and effect. Section 2. The first big data. We're jumping to the 1890s in the US, right in the thick of the Second Industrial Revolution. Think about the number 52,393 for a second. It's honestly mind-blowing. Long before computers, spreadsheets, or even basic electronic calculators were a thing, a researcher named Roland Faulkner and his team painstakingly collected 52,393 individual price observations for the U.S. Senate's Aldrich Committee. This right here was the dawn of big data. They gathered wholesale and retail prices going all the way back to 1860, and they weighted them based on actual surveys of household spending. It was an unprecedented, monumental effort to capture the total economic reality of the entire nation.
So, the crucial question is, why go through all that trouble? Well, the late 19th century was defined by bitter class conflict over national policy. Labor unions were claiming that the Republican tariff of 1890 had slashed their wages while raising the prices of everyday goods. Capital, meaning the employers and industrialists, argued the exact opposite, claiming industrial growth had given workers a huge boost in real wages. The Aldrich Committee was stuck in the middle, and they needed this early big data to serve as a totally neutral weapon to settle the argument. The result was the very first comprehensive wholesale and retail price indexes ever produced by a government. They literally needed impartial numbers to prove whose narrative was actually true.
Section 3. Perfecting the index math. Economists quickly realized that just piling up a mountain of data wasn't enough. They had to calculate it perfectly. This led to what we could call the math wars. Here's the core dilemma. How do you weight the items in your price basket when people's buying habits are constantly changing? On one hand, you had the Laspers Index, which uses a fixed basket of goods based on a past base year. It's great, but it totally ignores that if beef suddenly gets super expensive, people are just going to buy chicken instead. On the other hand, you had the Pache Index, which uses a current year basket of goods. That accounts for changing habits, but it makes historical comparisons a nightmare. These weren't just abstract formulas. They were desperate attempts to tie rigid math to the messy, shifting reality of human consumption. Thankfully, in 1922, the legendary economist Irving Fisher came up with an elegant solution. After testing dozens of formulas, he realized the best approach was essentially a compromise. Fisher's ideal index takes a geometric average of both the Laspers and Pache indexes. By blending the base year and current year weighting, he created a tool that tested economic theories against reality with way more accuracy.
It was a massive leap forward in making sure the numbers actually reflected true economic conditions.
Section 4. Navigating Wars and Wages.
Fast forward to the massive disruptions of World War II, where the economic index transformed from a neat mathematical tool into a literal battleground for worker survival. The U.S. government was controlling wages and prices to manage the war effort, using a cost of living index to adjust pay. But labor leaders were absolutely furious. They claimed the index completely hid the crushing inflation they were experiencing. In 1944, a labor committee issued a stinging indictment pointing to a sneaky tactic called forced uptrading. Basically, manufacturers stopped making cheap versions of goods, forcing people to buy the expensive versions. Technically, the price of the expensive version hadn't changed, so the official index missed it entirely. This left workers struggling to survive on stagnant wages, while their real living costs went through the roof.
Getting this math right isn't just some statistical game. It literally dictates human livelihoods. And that brings us to wage indexation. This is the idea that wages should automatically be adjusted in line with a reliable price index to protect workers' purchasing power from inflation. It's a concept born from those intense historical struggles, and it's still absolutely vital today. For instance, recent economic research shows that in modern East African economies, which often deal with high inflation volatility, wage indexation is a crucial tool for stabilizing the formal sector, forecasting budgets, and ensuring basic fairness for workers.
Section 5. Modern Producer Price Indices. Let's jump into the modern era and talk about how government officials today use the evolved versions of these historical tools. While the Consumer Price Index gets all the flashy headlines, the Producer Price Index, or PPI, is equally fascinating. It monitors the shifts in prices that producers, like factories and manufacturers, are paid for their output. It accounts for the costs of raw materials and manufacturing long before those goods ever hit the store shelves. Because of this, economists watch the PPI like a hawk. It's a massive early warning system for the economy, based on the real cost of industrial production. Tracking a consumer shopping cart is fundamentally different from tracking a factor's total output. The Consumer Price Index focuses exclusively on consumption goods and includes imported products, because, well, that's what you and I actually buy at the store. The Producer Price Index, on the other hand, covers the output goods created by domestic industries. It includes exports but not imports. So they measure the exact same economy but from completely opposite ends of the supply chain.
So how exactly is all this data gathered today? Let's look at the incredibly meticulous process used by the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics for their CPI. They send agents out specifically during the second and third weeks of every single month. They sample data across 50 distinct collection zones, 14 in Nairobi and 36 in other urban areas, and here is where our history lesson comes full circle. To compute the lower-level indices, they still use the exact same geometric mean method pioneered by William Stanley Jevons way back in the 1860s. Hundreds of years later, that foundational math remains the bedrock of modern economic governance.
Section 6. Why retail prices stay high.
Let's tackle the ultimate modern paradox. It's something we all feel at the checkout counter. Why is it that when global manufacturing costs go down, our grocery bills just never seem to follow suit? Well, according to recent reporting from the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics, a decrease in producer costs doesn't automatically mean relief for consumers. Why? Because, as the report bluntly puts it, companies can choose to increase their profit margins when raw material prices decline. When a global commodity shift makes raw materials cheaper, local business leaders and corporations often just absorb those savings to boost their own profits rather than passing the discount on to you. We can actually see the stark reality of this data in action. By the end of 2025, falling global commodity prices drove the Producer Price Index down to a 3-year low. Producer costs literally shrank by 2.43%. Manufacturers were saving money. But look at the Consumer Price Index for the very next month, January 2026. Retail inflation remained steady and elevated at 4.4%. Food and travel expenses continued to rise for the average person, completely disconnected from the savings happening on the factory floor. This divergence perfectly captures the tension between production savings and consumer reality. We have incredibly sophisticated tools to measure this gap. We know exactly when it costs less to make a product, and we know exactly when that same product is still being sold at a premium. The indices do their job flawlessly, exposing the exact moment where extra corporate profit is generated at the expense of the everyday consumer. So, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. From 17th century Oxford students to 19th century striking laborers, all the way to modern central banks, we have spent 400 years perfecting the art of measuring the economy. We generate mountains of big data to track every single penny of production and consumption. But as our modern numbers show,
knowing the math doesn't always guarantee fairness. When producer costs fall and retail prices stay high, we really have to ask, who actually benefits from the massive data that shapes our world? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions, and I'll see you next time.